Great, so welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the Global Compact, welcome to the Leaders Summit, the Virtual Leaders Summit, and our session, which is called The Mechanics of Partnerships. Looking under the hood, really, we hope to kind of explore a little bit deeper around this concept of partnerships and collaboration, and hope that participants will walk away from this session with a better understanding of lessons learned and how they can actually bring to life this idea of collaboration. We're hearing more and more that we need to recover better, we need to recover stronger, but in order to do that, we need to recover together. That togetherness obviously lends itself to partnership and collaboration. And we hope very much with today's session that our participants will get a much better understanding of the practical ways to advance collaboration within their work, whether they be in business, in government, in civil society, or at the UN. So I'm Melissa Powell. I'm the Chief of Staff of the Global Compact, and welcome to all of you joining us today. I've been with the Compact almost since the very beginning of Kofi Annan's launch many years ago. And I think, it's at these kind of transitional moments when we're looking back on where we've come from that I think we can see how much progress we've actually made. But of course, we're also reflecting on the huge challenges that lie ahead. And, from COVID to climate change to the stark inequalities in our world, all of these challenges are embodied in the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're gathering today particularly at a difficult time. After the world has spent months battling COVID, in recent weeks, another evil, racism and systemic injustice, has necessitated what I think is really a long overdue reckoning for societies around the world. But in many ways, I hope that what we've witnessed, what all of us have witnessed, only serves to remind us that together we can both raise our voices and take action. And through these kinds of unique platforms like the Global Compact, can actually lead to real systemic change. So in order to recover better and recover stronger, we know we need to recover together. But reflecting on the words of Kofi Annan 20 years ago, we need to give a human face to the global marketplace. That's the reality. And through partnership, embodied in Goal 17 of the SDGs, that gives us an opportunity to really make change happen. Now, COVID may be making the SDGs more difficult for us to achieve, but it has also reminded everyone of the interconnectedness of our world, which makes collaboration and partnership even more important. So with the acknowledgement that we know we need to work together, the question is how. And we've assembled today a fantastic panel of some of the world's experts from business, from the UN, from government, and from academia to share with us lessons learned and to reflect upon new challenges and trends. What are really the mechanics of partnerships that have the proven capacity for the kind of scale and long-term impact that we need to achieve the SDGs? And what looks different about the kinds of partnerships we're seeing now in response to COVID-19? As we combat COVID-19, what are the new features of collaboration that we're seeing? Today's session is going to focus on the what and the how of partnership. And let's look under the hood now and see what are the kinds of partnerships that are going to help us all deliver better on the SDGs. So without further ado, I'd like to briefly ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I think it's actually almost a little bit nicer to hear from the panelists directly than for me to go on and on about your fantastic bios. So first, I'd like to turn it over to Robert Piper. Robert, over to you with a brief intro first.
Hi, Melissa. I'm Robert Piper. I'm a United Nations Official Assistant Secretary General at the UN. I'm responsible for development coordination at the UN. I manage a network of 131 offices around the world of resident coordinators and their teams. I'm a 30-year UN person, spending most of my time in the field and specializing really in countries in transition coming out of disasters and crisis. But today, doing a lot more development than crisis work, although unfortunately COVID has changed a little bit of that in the last few months. Back to you, Melissa.
Robert. And Robert's responsible for all of the UN resident coordinators around the world. So definitely a big job. Thanks for being here, Robert. Martha, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Greetings from Mexico. My name is Marta Herrera. I work for CEMEX since 25 years ago. I'm the Global Responsible Business Director. I'm also the chair of the UN Global Compact in Mexico and also the chair of Arise in Mexico together with UNDRR. Great to be here.
To have you, Martha. Thank you so much. Martha not only wears a business hat, but she leads our local network in Mexico. So she comes at the conversation from that important perspective as well. We're happy to have you, Martha. Suzanne, over to you.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm in San Francisco. I am the Chief Impact Officer at Salesforce. We are a large technology company in the customer relationship management space. And I've had the privilege of being here for about 20 years since we started as a very small company. And I ran the .org for many years. And I'm out now looking after some of our more strategic partners, like with the UN Global Compact, doing some deep dive work around climate change and workforce development and impact investing, and finally an initiative that we run called Pledge 1%, which is for entrepreneurs that are looking to create sort of new kind of companies from the very beginning. So we've got 10,000 companies in close to 200 countries. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Suzanne. Appreciate it. We're really happy to have you and happy to have Salesforce as an active participant of the Compact. Christian, over to you for an intro.
Hi, everybody. Well, very happy to be here. I am Vice Director General of the Swiss Development Agency, in the job for 7 months, in charge of the Directorate for Global Cooperation, and that is the support of the UN development system, funds and programs, the multilateral development banks, plus a few big thematic global programs: health, climate, food security, water, and migration. Before that, I was for almost 13 years in the private sector, and before that, again, for almost 13 years in with the International Committee of the Red Cross. So there seems to be a pattern of 12 to 13 years.
Nice. Thanks so much, Kristen. It's great to have you. It's great to have somebody that embodies partnership so much in their experience, civil society, company, government. I'm sure you have a great perspective. Welcome. And last but certainly not least, Jane, over to you for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Melissa, and hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be part of this, this sort of very, very special community of practitioners from all over the world as we celebrate the UN Global Compact's 20th anniversary. I am the director of the Corporate Responsibility Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School, and first started working with the UN over 30 years ago in the lead up to the Rio Earth Summit, the UN Conference on Environment and Development, working at the time with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And having started my career as a banker, got passionately committed to the potential and the possibility of companies and the UN and civil society working together to solve global challenges. So I have spent my career doing that, and I've had the great pleasure of working with the UN Global Compact since the beginning. So it's wonderful to be here today. And happy anniversary, Melissa, and all of your team.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, it's hard to believe how the years have flown by, actually, speaking as somebody who's been with the Compact for many, many years, but a great milestone and important challenges ahead, but certainly a nice opportunity to reflect on where we've been. So look, this is our fantastic panel. Let's get started. I'd first like to remind our audience that there is a chat function. So if you have a burning question, put it in there. And although I have a few questions to ask the panelists, I'll also be taking some questions from the chat box throughout the course of the session, and also as follow-up to the session. So even if we don't get to your question, our team will be in touch with you. We want to make sure to be able to respond and engage with everyone that's joining us from around the world and everyone with a real interest in partnership. And to keep the conversation flowing, since we do have a lot of panelists, I'll encourage our panelists to respond with relatively short answers, if you can, just to try to keep it rolling. So first, let's start with Robert, if that sounds good. Robert, we know that the UN has undertaken some great efforts, particularly recently, to transform itself to be a better potential partner for companies in delivering local impact on the 2030 agenda and on the SDGs. Can you share with us a little bit about what the UN looks like today as UN country teams are mobilizing different stakeholders, including business and governments, to respond to COVID-19?
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I think, like many of us around the globe, Agenda 2030 really challenged all of us to think very, very differently. For everyone, a kind of call for a whole of society approach that we needed to bring together enormous coalitions of people and institutions to be able to make any headway on this very ambitious agenda. And the UN was also shaken up by 2030, I would say. It fundamentally challenged our 1950s architecture, insisted that we were not going to be comfortable in our sectors, in health, in education and agriculture, but that today's priorities required much more horizontal thinking. Issues like climate or inclusion or cities or jobs or water or youth, issues that really did not fit neatly our sectoral our sectoral boxes. This triggered a pretty major overhaul in the way the UN development system functions, a recognition that we needed to make our architecture work. And the way to do that was to focus on the field, on creating new ways of working together, coming out of our individual boxes and working, if you will, horizontally. And that challenged us to really create a new model, a new leadership model at the field level, where our what's called the UN resident coordinator, who leads UN country teams in 131 locations, has an enhanced authority to really pull people together. New financing instruments to encourage agencies to collaborate and not compete. New planning instruments that bring us together around a common goals. New reporting systems to tell the story of a joined up UN that isn't focused on our individual kind of corporate individual agency identities. A new relationship with government that moves the conversation towards policy and horizontal strategy rather than project management and the sort of size of our budget. But now it's all much more about analysis, about convening power, about building coalitions of investors. So a huge transformation on the ground. Some say the most dramatic transformation ever of the UN development system. It's now been going for 18 months. On the ground, it's translated into leaders. Our resident coordinators now are full-time. They used to be doing this on the side. Today, this role as a leader defines them. It's a full-time job. They now report to the Secretary General of the UN with the authority that comes with that. We now have strong offices of professionals leading on this work in 131 locations everywhere, an economist everywhere, a communications person, a strategic planner, a data person, and very importantly for this conversation, a partnerships and financing person across all 131 offices who are there to collaborate with private sector partners, with the Global Compact at the national networks. And so we've very deliberately reached out now to the Global Compact at the local level and really encouraged our resident coordinators, officers, to be a kind of one-stop shop to create this much better collaboration between the UN system and the private sector across the globe. The results are coming. We're seeing in less than a year a big jump in partnerships. Now almost pretty much 100 of our officers report that they're working on UN-led investments to support the SDG progress with private sector partners. We've seen a 43% increase in the number of partnerships that have been around the SDGs that have been signed in the last 12 months. Lots of great examples from Kenya to Lebanon, right across the globe of new types of partnerships, not only within countries, but of course internationally. Silicon Savannah collaboration famously between Kenya and the US, with the United Nations playing a brokering role. COVID has come along and truly challenged us to demonstrate that these reforms can make a more effective UN system. We are working as the UN family along 3 axes. We have a big health response that is obviously about stemming the further growth of the virus and looking at protecting health services that are essential services like vaccines. We have a big emergency humanitarian response that is targeting some of the most vulnerable people on the planet, refugees, informal migrants, displaced people. And then we have a larger socioeconomic response, which is looking at everything else, if you will, looking at the macroeconomics, looking at the social protection, looking at the jobs, and looking at the social cohesion that is under threat. This is all led at the country level by our resident coordinators who are busy responding on all 3 levels, leading the UN system and supporting governments. And indeed, already very much working with different private sector partners. We've got examples, many from Yemen, Lebanon, China, Brazil, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chad, DRC, the Philippines, where we've already collaborating very closely with different private sector partners to come together around this COVID challenge. It is much larger, obviously, than the United Nations and much larger than governments, so requires, again, an extraordinary coalition of the willing to try and manage this virus. So maybe I can stop there and go further if there are any questions.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you so much. Thanks. It's great to hear. I'm sure a lot of people are impressed to hear about this kind of transformation, about this new model that the UN has adopted, about the focus on the field and this more horizontal thinking that you're hearing about. I'd love to give the floor to Marta now to chime in, since Marta's joining us from Mexico. She's on the ground leading our local network there. Maybe Marta can tell us a little bit about how you're seeing that kind of collaboration happen. Are things changing in the context of Mexico when it comes to partnerships with the UN and government? I understand that 80% of the companies that are in the local network in Mexico are small and medium-sized businesses. So it'd be interesting if you can also reflect a little bit on partnership from that angle and what we can learn from your experience on the ground in Mexico. Marta, over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, let me start by saying that for us, engaging in multi-stakeholder collaboration has been key to promote and to achieve transformation. First of all, to deliver and scale results. Second, to replicate the best practices that we have nationwide and to collaborate with other networks around the world. Third, to really have differentiated kind of partnerships for scientific purposes, for manufacturing purposes, for funding purposes, etc. We have partnerships to integrate different lenses, ideas, cross-sectoral collaboration, to deliver specific actions, specifically to accelerate the phase of the 2030 agenda in Mexico. And as you mentioned, this was before and today with the COVID-19 crisis, the role of these partnerships to deliver the sustainable, inclusive, circular, resilient development could not be more essential. So for us, working in this partnership before was very important. So right now, we have already in place more than 80 formal and active multi-stakeholder alliances, which we strengthen, of course, after the COVID. We have the agreement with the Presidency Office of the 2030 Agenda and with the Private Sector Council, with agglomerates more than 1 million companies, 98% are small and medium-sized. We have agreements with the states and municipalities because we are focusing on the grassroots and the local development. We have, of course, been working very hard with the UN system, specifically with my good friend, the UN resident Antonio Molpeceres and all his team, and with the UN system, which has 21 agencies here in Mexico. We have been working with the Mexican Stock Exchange for the financial sector. We have been working with the organized civil society organizations and trade unions, and of course with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network from the university. So we are working on a focused manner with a common goal. Right now, with limited resources, we need to be more efficient and bring, as you mentioned, the SMEs on board. we have learned that alliances need to have and need to have clear fundamentals like this systemic and holistic view, very well focused and clear objectives, so we can advance on our purpose. Very diverse and inclusive, bringing into the table all these different lenses. We need to strengthen the part of the trust and transparency for the mutual benefit and accountability for all. We need to be very structured and fit for purpose, and we need to have strong leaderships and management for that. We need to monitor our alliances. We need to review the interaction. We need to have open feedback. We need to make these partnerships a learning process. We need to facilitate a true communities of practice. We need, especially now, to be very flexible and adapt to all the changes. And we need to try to eliminate all the barriers, because we need innovation. We need to share data, to share information, and we need to leave egos and, as you say, logos outside, because we need to have this change in mindset and skill set. We need to work together for the long term of the well-being of the people of this country, and we need to bring abroad all kind of people, institutions, and especially SMEs, and need to spend time, resources, and talent to make these collective actions for the collective good, especially right now.
Martha, I love your point about leaving the logos aside and really collaborating truly with a shared purpose in mind. But also, thanks for sharing some of those partnership principles that you're using in your collaboration around making sure you have the shared purpose and shared goals, and being really structured in your approach to keep it on track and to measure your results, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all looking for.
Exactly.
So thank you for that, Martha. Suzanne, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now. Given Salesforce's engagement with the UN around multi-stakeholder partnerships, what has Salesforce learned to kind of transforming and channeling goodwill and good intention into actual action and impact on the ground? Suzanne, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, and thanks to all the other panelists as well. And if I think about our approach to partnership, and I think about the moment that we're in, we work with many UN agencies, probably not as many as Robert, but a lot, and a lot of the big ones, UNEP, the World Food Program, United Nations Foundation, UN Women, just such a great lever for us to be able to make change at scale. And if I think about what we've learned and how we can sort of translate that into action, we're in a moment of time where we're in a health crisis, we're in an economic crisis, an inequality crisis, a leadership crisis, and finally a climate crisis that we can't forget about. So there is a lot coming at us sort of from many, many angles. And in order to make change, we have to focus on what we do best. And focus is key there, and bringing in the right partners, I think, is key. So, we're a technology company, we're a platform company. We've worked for years with the UN Foundation, helping to sort of manage all of their partnerships. We've worked with the World Food Program to help them manage their distribution systems on our platform. And so what we can do in this moment to translate our good intent into action is to bring the best of what we do, which is our technology and our people, both. So just a couple sort of quick examples on what that's looked like in the past year. We use the Sustainable Development Goals to really, as a framework, to really guide the actions that we take. And we've really focused on a few of them that we think we can move the needle on. And I'll just use one, which is oceans. And we built something in partnership with the World Economic Forum and Microsoft and Deloitte, which is a way to bring together communities of practice through technology. These are investors working on oceans issues, looking for projects. These are entrepreneurs. These are young people. These are governments. And so this is a platform that we're able to build on Salesforce as a way to track and measure the progress And we started with oceans, and we plan to go throughout all the other SDGs. And then the second that I want to just put as an example is an initiative that we launched, sort of the other lung, if you will, of the planet, which is on trees. And this is in partnership with the UNEP Decade of Action. This is the critical decade to address climate action in a powerful way. And UNEP is really coming out strong. I'm so thrilled about that. And it's also in partnership with the World Economic Forum. And it's a whole host of different companies that are involved, incredible companies doing great things like MasterCard and Pepsi and, you know, on, but also governments and nonprofits, some of the big ones I mentioned, but also, you know, really important ones like the Nature Conservancy. And, you know, we've had activists. And when we launched, we had a spiritual leader, we had an NGO leader, we had a business leader, we had a government leader. And we really wanted to create a multi-stakeholder platform on behalf of nature-based solutions, the conservation of trees in particular. It's called 1t.org, now housed at WEF. But our ability to make a difference in the partnership really came to our ability to provide a technology solution that is going to get behind and really put the wind in the sails, if you will, of all these phenomenal efforts happening at the public sector.
So much, Suzanne. Thanks for the concrete examples. And I think, you know, when you're talking about, you know, finding the lever to make change at scale, I think that's a nice transition to talking about another such lever, which is on the public policy side of things. Because of course, that's also how we can actually use another important lever, that lever of governments. I'd like to turn the floor over to Christian. Christian, can you share with us what does good public policy look like from the Swiss vantage point when it comes to kind of creating the enabling environment for these kinds of partnerships to actually achieve scale? Christian, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Melissa. Thanks to the other panelists. When we look at public-private partnerships, I think this is what you wanted me to focus on specifically. We sort of look for three things. The first is innovation. The second is scale, and Suzanne, you just mentioned it. And then the third, what you hinted at, Melissa, in your opening, is systems change. So when we partner as a public actor with private sector, these are the things we're looking for, and we're partnering with a whole range of private sector actors. That goes really from the smallholder farmer to the local social entrepreneur, then all the way to the impact investor, mainstream investor, increasingly, hopefully, to the multinational companies. So it's the whole range of partnerships. Of course, the overall framing for this is the 2030 agenda, and I think that's really critical and underlying the various instruments and principles also of responsible business behavior. We have, of course, and happy anniversary, the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact, but then the UN guiding principles of our friend, common friend, John Ruggie, and then the due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct of the OECD, and there are more. Switzerland actually firmly believes in these instruments, and in January 2020, the Swiss government launched a revised action plan on corporate social responsibility, and also a revised action plan on the implementation of the UN guiding principles. Let me come back to the partnerships. Typically, a public-private partnership from a Swiss Development Agency perspective actually has four actors, or four types of actor. We have public sector actors, big, government donors like ourselves. We have private sector actors, and I mentioned the different varieties of actors before. Then we have civil society. Actually, civil society plays a critical role in these public-private partnership, and very often academia. We need a few basics for these partnerships. partnerships. And Marta, you hinted at some of them. So first of all, a common set of values that we share. So a shared vision, and a shared vision also a shared understanding of the basics, and then a shared vision of where we want to go. Also a common understanding on how we deal with risks. Two very important keywords are then complementarity and subsidiarity. We partner with people who are different from ourselves because they have a different skill sets. Is leveraging the different skill sets and the different, intrinsic purposes or goals of these different actors for a common outcome. So there is a shared path together, but you bring the expertise of different actors together. So it needs then two important additional things. First, a willingness to take risk. So not only a common understanding of what the risks are, but a willingness to take risks and to go beyond the logo, beyond the comfort zone, to move into new territory. This is where the innovation, this is where the scale, and this is where the systems change comes in. And then finally, of course, you have to fix the rules of the game. You need to have steering mechanisms. You have to have clear understanding on how you want to communicate externally. You have to also have mechanisms in place on how to deal with adversity. And then one last point, which would also be my concluding remark: partnerships take time. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Very, very helpful. Great insights. Jane, I'm gonna bring you in. I mean, you have a great big picture perspective. You're engaging with a lot of companies. You're working with the Business Fights Poverty platform. Can you share with us some of the trends you're seeing kind of holistically across your engagements with companies and others in this partnership space?
Absolutely. Thanks, Melissa. And I think really sort of building on what other colleagues have already said, I sort of see sort of three key, and they're both sort of trends, but also sort of broad categories of partnership that I think, and we need all of them simultaneously. So I just want to quickly, run through those. And I think we need them all simultaneously if we are going to achieve both the speed and agility, but also the sort of scale and systemic impact that other colleagues have mentioned. And the first are what I would call sort of project level, local partnerships, often with a very specific goal and outcome, often time bound, and normally between sort of a relatively small group of players where there is complementarity and sort of shared risks and shared resources. So, for example, some of the immediate emergency response type partnerships in both the current pandemic emergency, but other emergencies. A pharmaceutical company working with a government and a research institute on developing or sort of distributing vaccines or medicine, or a couple of food and beverage companies working with some financial companies and technology companies on getting credit and insurance and new technologies to a group of smallholder farmers in a particular country and a particular value chain. And we need an education company or a technology company working with the Ministry of Education on digital inclusion for education. And I would argue we need thousands, we need hundreds of thousands of those types of, sort of project level, on the ground, roll up your sleeves, mobilize resources with responsible conduct and practices as well. But with often, as I say, sort of time-bound, very specific outcomes. The second category that I think is important, and several colleagues have alluded to it, are more sort of, systems level or sector focused partnerships. And I take Robert's point that, we also need to look horizontally beyond sectors. But I do think, we've learned a lot and we need to do much more of partnership to strengthen food systems or health systems or transportation systems or financial systems. And there, getting a group of companies together on a pre-competitive basis, a dozen, if not, 20, 30, 40 companies with government, with other civic and academic partners to address some of the obstacles at a systems level. So, just a couple of examples. I mean, Suzanne had some great examples, that she's already shared around oceans and and the 3 trillion initiative. But other examples like GSMA, which is the organization for all the mobile phone operators. They have something called Mobile for Development, which many of you are familiar with. Because they were already working together, they were able to get sort of 5 of the biggest mobile operators in Africa to work very quickly together. That it would have been, I think, difficult if they hadn't already been doing work together to get greater interoperability in response to the pandemic. Or the Food Action Alliance of the World Economic Forum, getting food companies and nutrition companies together, with governments and other partners on both strengthening farmers, but also producing and delivering more accessible, affordable, nutritious foods. Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which the UN has played such an important role in, and a number of other health partnerships, which, if anything, we need to double down on those and work even harder on those types of sort of sector systems partnerships. But then thirdly, and very importantly, and picking up on both Marta's examples and Robert's examples, are the sort of country level, I would sort of call them policy advocacy, agenda setting partnerships, where you've got companies across industry sectors working with civil society leaders, but really supporting government and sometimes challenging government on government sort of public policies, policy reform, incentives, the rules of the game, as Christian also described it at a broader level. And I think that one of the best examples of that is the local compacts of the UN Global Compact, and Marta gave us the example of Mexico. How can we dramatically scale up those compacts, both helping micro and small enterprises and their networks do project level partnerships, but then having their collective voice to either work with government or advocate for government, to get to net zero, to have greater inclusion, to address some of the racial inequalities, etc. So how do we get a common voice from business? And we heard from Mexico, just 2 other very quick examples. The UK UN Global Compact Network, just last week, 150 leaders sent a letter to the Prime Minister of the UK and the government saying, these are what we need to see in terms of the SDGs and recovery packages. In Kenya, a group of companies sort of came together who had been working together on an immediate response to the pandemic, and sort of sharing all sorts of platforms to increase sort of awareness on some of the public health issues of the pandemic, working very closely with the UN system and the Ministry of Health. And so those national level policy advocacy partnerships, I think, are critically important. And if we can have project level, which gives a lot of opportunity for small enterprises to get engaged with partnerships that might not have the voice at the national level, the sector sort of system level pre-competitive partnerships, and then national sort of policy advocacy, agenda setting partnerships at the country level.
Thank you very much, Jane. Not only have you given us the framework for thinking about partnerships in the 3 buckets, but you've also addressed some of the questions people were putting in the chat. In so doing, particularly touching upon the health systems, the question around health systems and how partnerships can be leveraged to really improve health systems, as one example. We are collecting some questions from the chat, and I am going to weave them into the next round here. But I encourage those of you who are participating to share your questions with us. So picking up on COVID particularly, and people wanting to understand, of course partnerships are important, but in the process we're having to deal with the financial constraints, the socioeconomic constraints. How can we realistically do partnerships in this context? How can companies actually pivot to be supporting societies through partnership, and really taking that step that one step further to really make that happen? Suzanne, I'd like to turn it over to you. Can you share a few thoughts on that from Salesforce's perspective?
Sure. I think ever more important to work together to solve problems and make change than there is in this moment and as a result of COVID. And I'll just give you again a couple sort of practical examples. So one of our partners is here in San Francisco called UCSF, which is a big hospital system. And they, when the whole outbreak happened in the beginning, and huge issue, and we started to see massive shortages of masks and gear. we were able to call on our partner in China, actually Alibaba, who had experience in this area, and we were able to procure very quickly, a technology company, procure very quickly for beginning with UCSF, but went to New York and then France and Chicago, just massive loads of PPE for hospitals that needed them early on, 3 million pieces actually, 6 now sort of towards where we are today. So that partnership, we never thought that's, how we would be partnering with Alibaba when we started the partnership with them, but it just turned out to be an incredible way to get resources very quickly to people who needed them. And the second is sort of back to technology. So, what can we do? So we were able to, well, just to pause on technology for a second, we were able to philanthropically, we have a big partnership with school districts all over the world. And, kids all of a sudden got thrown into online learning, and teachers and parents, and everything changed, myself included. I have, 2 kids at home now that I'm also supposed to be a teacher for, and so we partnered with Common Sense Media, who built this incredible platform called Wide Open School and was able to launch it really quickly. We partnered with our school districts and some of our telco customers to be able to provide connectivity and access to technology. A lot of students don't have, they were taught, they said, go finish your year online, and there was 1 computer in the home, and 2 parents now working from home and 3 kids, and it just wasn't working. So we were able to really go out for our Pledge 1% partners and our telco partners, and able to sort of look at the issue of access and equipment in the beginning, early days of the COVID moment. And now where we are, the sort of last thing I'll say is we've been working with our partners, both our technology partners like the Accentures and Deloittes of the world, but also our customers like the retailers and the manufacturers, about what does it look like to get back to work? What kind of tools are companies going to need to get back to work? So since it's such a privilege to be at a platform company, because we were able to build a whole suite of products in under 6 weeks called work.com, which are things like shift scheduling and contact tracing and facilities management. And so that's now available to all of our customers and our partners as a way to help people think about how do they get back to work and provide tools that are really actionable. So those are just a sort of few examples, and over the last really 3 months.
So much for those concrete examples. I mean, maybe just a quick follow-up, because a colleague joining us asked, is Salesforce involved in any partnership activities in South America?
Yeah, we have some offices there for sure. Growing a lot in LACA, in Mexico, in Argentina, and Brazil. So looking forward to sort of learning more about the region and building out our staff there. We tend to work most deeply where we have people, because we can really provide boots on the street, if you will, to sort of help organizations get going. And it's just been as of late where we've had sort of a critical mass of people. So it's exciting. Thank
you. And thanks for our participants of sharing some good questions. I'm weaving them in as we go. Robert, I'd like to turn it over to you now though, picking up on some concrete examples like Suzanne has shared. From your standpoint, what are resident coordinators doing? How are they really leveraging their role to make innovative partnerships happen on the ground at the country level of the sort that we're talking about today?
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, I mean, the biggest gift we have given our leadership in the field is time, by far the most valuable commodity. And we're seeing the really many resident coordinators getting out of their office, spending a lot more time with chambers of commerce and other business partners, but not in the capital city, but actually getting out and about. Martha mentioned Antonio, our resident coordinator in Mexico. He's famous for getting out of Mexico City and getting to know the chambers of commerce really much more at the local level. And I think this is by far the most important. We're trying to really try and not be so capital city centric. There's a whole lot of entrepreneurship and work out there well beyond the capital city. I think second, they're leveraging our new financing instruments. We opened a fund called the Joint Sustainable Development Goals Fund a couple of years ago, and it's really intended deliberately to develop new muscles in the UN system to accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals. So we did some initial work, was looking at how to really join up policy work around social protection. And the last round of financing, so we put about $70 million into innovation around social protection. And in the last few weeks, we've put $60 million into about 70 countries, looking at what we're calling integrated national financing frameworks, which is about bringing large consortia of investors in around the Sustainable Development Goals, not just the aid crowd, not just the government money, of course, but the private sector as well. And that, again, it's not something we've done before. It's a new muscle that we have to develop. I'm not here to pretend we have it sorted, but we're very serious, and the good resident coordinators are accessing those resources in order to develop those muscles. And the next round of financing will be specifically targeting innovative financing. So we're looking for specific projects where we can test ideas with a high risk threshold, so that again the UN moves into this space, finds out how to do it, gets good at it, and from our side we step back and let the system kind of run with it. But there are lots of great examples coming out of COVID, and Suzanne mentioned some already just now. We're in different areas around analytics, for example. We're working with the European Space Agency, of all people, and the private sector in Moldova to build this sort of big data platform that allows us to track COVID issues in real time. In Mexico, with Martha's Global Compact team, there's been a big effort to survey with the private sector the impact of COVID, and more importantly, how to harness the private sectors for the recovery process. In other countries, we're partnering with the private sector to look for solutions. In Benin, for example, we've come together with a mobile phone company, and using their infrastructure, really reached out to citizens to give us feedback about how the United Nations is performing, becoming more accountable to the public, not just to governments. 100,000 people from Benin had their say, and that has helped shape our strategies on the ground. In Sri Lanka, we've started to partner with Facebook, looking at hate speech and disinformation and sort of misinformation around COVID and the sort of stigmatization that's come with COVID. Again, so looking with private sector partners at solutions that they can bring to us that we are unable to generate within the UN. In other cases, Nigeria, Lebanon, we're working with the private sector really on resources and building consortia. Nigeria, big response from private companies to invest in a new COVID fund to respond quickly to provide, in the first instance, medical equipment and supplies. In Lebanon, the World Food Programme has been crowdfunding resources for a campaign to deal with food insecurity and hunger. And finally, I would say other resident coordinators are working with the private sector and bringing the UN's convening power to kind of bring people together around the COVID problem. And I'll stop with that example of Barbados, where we have a regional office that covers, I think, 8 Eastern Caribbean countries, not just Barbados. And there, the resident coordinators really built a large consortium with the private sector, covering multiple countries, to together develop recovery strategies to deal with COVID. And it's hit some of the small island developing states very hard, heavily dependent on tourism, on remittances, on imported food. And so we really have to come up with some very innovative ideas for these types of environments. So there's a lot of creativity going on, I think, is the prerequisite, and openness to learning and discovering the extraordinary thinking and ideas that come out of other sectors well beyond the United Nations, and putting the time in, getting out of our offices, pounding the streets, sitting with consortia, with chambers of commerce, with individual entrepreneurs, and putting together these recovery strategies. I think this is where we have a great story to tell from the last couple of months.
Hey, thanks so much, Robert. Thanks for the wealth of concrete examples. Also, I think it's particularly interesting for participants hearing about the very different types of operating environments that you're talking about, whether it's in a humanitarian context, whether it's in, a developing country, a small island state. So I think, all of these requiring slightly different approaches, but nonetheless important that it's good to know that the UN system is actively engaging in partnerships around the world. And I think particularly your point about the SDG fund, I mean, it's not always that you'll hear the UN say that there's an innovative financing mechanism with a high risk threshold that you can tap into to really help actually make this happen. So thanks for sharing that practical point as well. I'd like to take a question from the audience, and I'm going to give this one to Marta because I think Marta is in the best place to contribute to it. A number of our participants today are coming from small and medium-sized businesses, and they want to know where they fit into this conversation. What role can a small business play as a partner? And how can larger organizations and companies leverage the innovation that often thrives in small operations for greater impact and scale? Really great question. Martha,
yeah,
over to you.
Great question. Thank you. Well, let me give you an example. In Mexico, we have more or less around 4 million SMEs. And unfortunately, after the pandemic, around 250,000 will need to close or are closing. And that will be representing 1.5 million jobs at least, plus all the family businesses, etc. For us in the past and right now, especially to work with SMEs is super important. To really, we need to become enablers for the inclusion of SMEs on all these SDG movement and help them on the transformational processes. But we really need to be very empathetic and understand their reality. For us, SMEs play a very important role. There is a lot of opportunity right now. They could be the intermediary between the global level and the local communities. They can find solutions faster, they can adapt faster, they can be very flexible. All their collaborators can know their communities, they work pretty hard. So we are working very close together with them of course, the reactivation and the recovery in the short run, and that's for sure. But also, we have seen a lot of interest in training, and they have been participating in a lot of webinars for building resilient SMEs. We have been training a lot on the mindset and on the skill set for leaders inside to really interiorize into their own strategies the principles and the SDGs in a very practical way. So training is a very important thing to really help them align with the supply chains for the big corporations, to get involved in supply chain projects or initiatives, to really help them in this process of the digitalization, which is key for them, to help them build strong cultures among their Center for Resilience. We are helping them as a network to promote public policy, to bring incentives for the recovery. We are working together with UN agencies, for example, the UNDP, which is working on for example, in an initiative called Solidarity in Mexico, which is going to help family businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, networking and bringing these small-sized companies to the working groups that we already have and participate on very specific working groups like the economic recovery or the resilient table or the diversity and inclusion or the energy, etc. So we think that we need to bring more incentives. We need to bring more global initiatives for them. We need to work with the UN system and the UN Global Compact to really bring SMEs on the table and be very inclusive and work very, because if we really want to move the needle, as we say, we need to bring them on the table. I mean, if they are part of the 98% of all companies in our countries, if we don't bring them in, we are not going to move the needle at all.
Martha, great response. Really appreciate it. We've been hearing there's a few other questions related to scale. This notion of scale. How are we scaling partnerships that work? Christian, I want to turn this question over to you. In particular, where have government contributions been able to mobilize private sector actors in ways that can't be accomplished by any one stakeholder just working on their own? Can you share a success story from the government standpoint?
Yes, I can. I'll give you three, very briefly. Two health ones, and then a food security one. The first one on health, children-friendly malaria treatment. Deliberately choosing malaria because with the COVID crisis, other pandemics tend to get forgotten, and malaria is one of those. And we saw incredible spikes during Ebola, for example, when the global community focused on Ebola. Malaria went up. 70% of the burden of malaria mortality is borne by children. So 2009, time. I mentioned time. 2009, seed funding from a series of governments, including the Swiss Development Agency, a company, Novartis pharmaceutical company, developing a malaria drug, a dispersible malaria drug for children. The NGO, I mentioned NGOs as well, Medicines for Malaria Ventures, MMV, looking at the on-the-ground acceptability, testing, feasibility. WHO, including the then to become drug Coartem into the pre-qualified medicines list. Result 10 years later, close to more than 390 million treatments delivered worldwide without profit. The company had to commit to a zero profit pricing in over 50 countries. Second example, COVID. The access to COVID-19 tools accelerator, the ACT accelerator, three elements, vaccines, treatment, diagnostics, pulled together by WHO, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gavi, CEPI, Global Fund, United, Wellcome Trust, a bunch of companies, and then public sector actors like ourselves. We have supported the three pillars of the accelerator with over 70 million Swiss francs out of a package of 400 million Swiss francs, and that in addition to, of course, the 32 or so million given to WHO since the beginning of the crisis. Third example, the IFAD, so the International Fund for Agricultural Development, Rome-based IFI, part of the Rome-based UN agencies, the Agribusiness Capital Fund. The ABC Fund is covering a gap. It's bridging a gap between the smallholder farmer and the local markets. So we're looking at small, medium-sized enterprises that are too big for the microcredit and too small for typical market-based credits. The volume of funding to be raised is in the order of 250 million. The ABC Fund has three levels. The C shares, so Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the European Union support IFAD to purchase, so to provide a first loss guarantee at the basis, purchasing these C shares. The second layer are the B shares, which would typically go to a philanthropy, a foundation, or an IFI. And then the third level are the actual A shares, which would typically then attract traditional private sector capital. So to bridge this innovation gap, agriculture provides globally 8% of GDP, but only has 2% of investment, because typically investing in small and medium enterprises, these are the processing, transformation, transport enterprises that really are the bridge between the smallholder farmer and the local market. So this is risky, and with this ABC fund, we are actually trying to take out some of the risk and basically make these SMEs bankable for traditional investors. We'll see how it goes.
Thanks so much. I think that ABC fund example, I think, is particularly interesting, and particularly, you know, innovation, as we were talking about, on the UN side, on the government side, on the corporate side. It's great, and we'll look forward to seeing how that works out, and great work on your end. I know we're running a little bit short for time, but we have a really good question that I'm going to give to Jane as from the audience. Given the challenges of COVID-19, many companies and public organizations may be in survival mode. Partnerships might easily be put on the chopping block as part of cost-saving measures. Why do partnerships matter in this pandemic? And why does investing in partnership projects and initiatives make sense in times of resource scarcity? Jane, over to you.
No, I mean, it's no doubt. I mean, this is both an incredibly challenging time for partnerships, because the needs and the urgencies, arguably greater than it's been in any of our careers and lives in our generation. At the same time that the resources are more constrained and time is more constrained, because of these the challenges you outline. Having said that, I think the examples my colleagues have already shared, epitomize this. There has been so much creativity and innovation and flexibility and pivoting amongst companies, NGO partners, I think a lot of the UN agencies on the ground in response to the crisis. And so in fact, so far, I mean, obviously, we're going to have a lot of challenging months ahead of us, still years ahead of us. If anything, I think partnering has ramped up. Certainly with sort of larger companies and the UN, in sort of like three main ways. First of all, and Suzanne had some great examples of that sort of immediate response of using both core business capabilities, core competencies, as well as philanthropy to respond around protecting and saving lives and saving and protecting livelihoods and supporting SMEs. So there's been hundreds of new partnerships emerging on that front. Secondly, I think we are now seeing companies with some of their more established NGO partners and civil society partners and small business organizations taking a step back and saying, okay, what are 3 or 4 things that we can really focus on to build back in a way that is more inclusive and sustainable? And we are beginning to see more of these policy advocacy partnerships. So, yes, there are certainly, obviously, particularly small companies, hundreds of thousands struggling for survival. Large companies in certain industry sectors are struggling for survival, and yet, I think overall we're seeing more of a recognition that we need partnerships at that project level, that system level, the country level, because of the crisis. If anything, it's really brought out the creativity, ingenuity of individuals within companies, social entrepreneurs, to do things differently, and in development finance institutions recognizing each other's due diligence for the first time, which they haven't done in the past, so that they can speed up financing. The ABC example, the COVID accelerator. So we're seeing a lot, but yeah, it's still very, very challenging, and it's going to continue to be as we move forward.
Great response. Thank you so much for your insights, Jane. That's excellent. Well, look, we're really running out of time, but this has been a fantastic session. I mean, you can see why we invited all of these fantastic experts from around the world to join us today. I'm not going to try to wrap up this in one word or one phrase, but I would like to turn it over to each of our panelists, kind of in closing, if there's one main takeaway that you'd like everyone watching today who are keen on better understanding and engaging in partnerships to walk away with, when they're back to their day jobs after the Leaders Summit. What's the one takeaway that, just sort of 20 seconds that you'd really like to convey to the audience? Let's start with Christian.
Thanks. Well, partnerships take time. Each partner brings in their expertise. The role of the public sector and civil society in these partnerships is to ensure that the partnership brings a clear development outcome and that it is inclusive.
Great, thank you.
That were three.
Martha, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, my last comment will be, it doesn't matter the size of your business or organization. It is all our responsibility to do transformational change and move from individual to collective impact.
Great, thank you. Suzanne, over to you.
I would just say this is a defining moment. You know, let's use this crisis as an opportunity to change how we are and act in the world, whether that's engaging in policy to build back better from a climate perspective, figuring out how to get your company net zero. You know, we've got Sustainability Cloud that we just launched this year. I'm really excited about their sort of tool, bring your tools, but build back better. Use it as an opportunity to think about inclusive growth, environmentally friendly growth, and a way to just live a little bit more tolerantly and lightly on the planet.
Well said. Jane, over to you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those comments. And I think, from me, whether we're individuals or institutions, this sort of idea that Suzanne introduced at the beginning of focusing on our core capabilities, our core competencies, and then doing so in a way that is genuinely inclusive, listening to others and respecting both our partners, but respect sort of being, to me, the fundamental principle of making partnerships work, but also ensuring that they and stakeholders are included in a way that has impact.
Melissa.
I think we've lost Melissa.
We've lost Melissa.
Melissa is frozen. Let me take I think there was a pattern, so I'm going to jump in while we bring Melissa back. And I think I want to add a little bit, build on Suzanne's message about sort of building back better. I think if there's one message from this COVID crisis as well, is that we've let some basic issues, we've neglected some very basic issues. So this crisis has revealed, not only is it, as she says, an opportunity to kind of deal with some long-term structural shortcomings, but it's also a reminder that there are some very basic issues that need to be done. We need to worry about risk. We need to worry about preparedness. We need to look at where the market is working and where it needs to be, carefully kind of supported and guided. We need to really make sure that we're thinking preventatively and not allowing the kind of urgent to crowd out the important. So I think this, for me, this has been a big wake-up call on things like primary healthcare, for example, and on the informal sector in the employment market, on social protection systems. So I think that, for me, is my big takeaway from this discussion, is that these private partnerships have to be at the heart of this kind of a response, and now's the time to do it. So we can bring something good out of what has been obviously a pretty distressing couple of months and some tough months ahead. We've lost our chair. I wonder whether we should collectively elect a new one, a new CEO, and on her behalf call this quits.
You have the voice, Robert, so let's wrap up.
We can collectively wrap up.
But maybe, as the UN person, maybe I can, Angus, no.
Hello,
do you
everyone.
want to close this up? Yes.
Hi, everyone. Sorry that we lost our captain, Melissa, but I'm just jumping in to thank all of you for your great insights. I've been monitoring the chat. You've really been a tremendous value and a great contribution to this historic Leaders Summit. I know that there were many partnership practitioners who were online and very much appreciated your unique perspectives. Now more than ever, we need this kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration. And I hope that as you've all touched on so eloquently, that this challenge becomes an opportunity for us to cooperate better, to collaborate better, to partner at a greater scale and impact, so that we can realize the decade of action. So thank you so much on behalf of Melissa and the whole Global Compact team. And I hope that you can all enjoy the rest of the summit. Lots of other interesting conversations happening. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Part of this group. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.